For 2 years, my husband refused to have sex with me. Not out of anger, not because he stopped loving me, but because he was hiding something in his body that he was too afraid to name. I spent those 2 years on my knees, apologizing for a mistake I confessed. He spent those same 2 years pretending his hands were clean. This is the story of what happens when two people destroy the same marriage from different directions, and only one of them tells the truth. I need you to stay with me through every part of this, because the ending will change the way you understood everything that came before it. I want you to see us the way we were before everything broke. Not because I need your sympathy, I stopped needing that a long time ago. But because if you only know the ending of this story, you will never fully understand how devastating the fall actually was. You need to feel what existed before it was taken apart. You need to know what we were when we were whole. So stay with me here for a moment before the pain arrives, because this part matters just as much as everything that comes after it. Our flat in Luke Bay was small. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen where the tap dripped if you didn't turn it all the way off, a sitting room with a second-hand couch that Paul said had character and I said had damage. We argued about that couch for 1.5 years. He refused to replace it. I refused to stop complaining about it. Neither of us ever moved on it. And somehow, that stubborn little standoff was one of the most comfortable things about our life together. I miss that argument more than I have the language to properly explain.
Paul was a construction project supervisor, always somewhere in Abuja with a hard heart and a problem to solve. I worked at the ministry in the Central Business District, the woman that colleagues brought their headaches to because I always had a steady answer for everyone else's problems, even when I was quietly drowning in my own. Together, we were not rich. We were not the couple with the newest car or the biggest flat or the most impressive address. But we were solid, the kind of solid that takes years to build carefully and feels, when you are standing inside it, like it could survive anything. Saturday mornings, Paul would be crouched under the kitchen sink, fixing that same leaking tap. It was always that same tap, week after week, the repair never fully taking. And I would stand in the doorway with my arms folded, telling him he was taking too long. He would look up at me with that smile, that specific Paul smile that started slow and reached his eyes last. And he would say, "Come and fix it yourself if you know better." I never moved, he always finished. And that small, completely ordinary routine was one of the safest feelings I have ever known in my entire life. Sunday jollof was a whole separate conversation in our house. I cooked it every single week without fail. Every week, Paul went back for a 3rd serving. Every week, he still sat across from me at that dining table and refused to admit that mine was the best in Lugbe. I would wait. He would chew. He would look at the ceiling like he was deliberating, and then he would go back for more without saying a word, and we both understood that the silence was the compliment. I think about that now, how something as ordinary as a man going back for more food could feel, at the time, like being completely and quietly loved. We saved up for birthday dinners at a small restaurant in Wusetu. Nothing extravagant, a corner table, a shared plate of something we had been talking about trying for weeks, a bottle of something cold. He always remembered how I took my tea. 2 sugars, no milk, stir it longer than necessary. I kept his shirts ironed, even on the evenings I came home from the ministry exhausted and wanted nothing more than to sit down and not be responsible for anything. I did it anyway, not because I had to, because that is how I loved him, quietly, consistently, without making a performance of it. We were not a perfect couple. I want to be honest about that. We argued. We had nights where we went to bed without resolving something and lay in the dark on opposite edges of the mattress waiting for the other person to move first. We had disagreements about money and about family and about small things that felt large at the wrong time of day. But underneath all of it, underneath every argument and every difficult evening, there was something steady, something that felt permanent. We were the kind of couple that made other people feel quietly hopeful about love just by existing near them. Then Paul's firm called him to Calabar, and the first crack appeared, so thin, so quiet that we almost missed it entirely. Paul left for what his firm called a 6-week project,
6 weeks, he said over dinner the night before. Calm, almost casual, the way you say something you have decided not to make into a bigger thing than it needs to be. I nodded. I told him I would manage. I believed both of us completely when I said it. I packed his bag with him that Sunday evening. I ironed 3 shirts he did not ask me to iron. I made sure his toiletries were organized in the side pocket the way he liked them. I stood at the door of our Lugbe flat the next morning and watched him load his car, and I told myself, 6 weeks, that is nothing. We have survived harder things than 6 weeks. 6 weeks became 2 months. 2 months became 4. 4 months stretched further with a phone call that lasted 4 minutes and spent 2 of them explaining contract extensions like I was a colleague being briefed rather than a wife being asked to wait longer. I said I understood. I hung up and sat on our second-hand couch, the one with character, the one we never stopped arguing about, and I understood nothing except that the flat was very quiet and Paul's side of the wardrobe still smelled like him, and I was becoming someone who noticed things like that because there was nothing else to notice. I held that flat together with everything I had, watered the plants, paid the bills on time every month, kept food in the fridge because I told myself he could come back any weekend unannounced, and I wanted the home to feel like I had never stopped expecting him. Some evenings I cooked full meals for one person and sat at our dining table alone with the television on just to fill the silence with something that sounded like company. Some nights I called and he picked up, and for 20 minutes I could breathe properly again. Other nights the phone rang and rang and rang until it didn't. I told myself he was on site. I told myself signal in Calabar was unreliable. I told myself many things in those months that I have since completely stopped believing. By the 4th month, I was disappearing inside that flat, and I did not even fully realize it was happening. Loneliness does not arrive loudly. It does not knock on your door and announce itself. It moves in gradually, quietly, taking up small amounts of space at a time, until one evening you look around and realize it has filled every room, and you cannot remember exactly when that happened. I was still functioning, still going to work, still answering people's questions in the ministry with steady, reliable answers. But inside the flat, alone, I was hollowing out in a way I had no language for and no one to tell. So I decided to surprise him. I bought a bus ticket to Calabar on a Friday morning without telling Paul I was coming. I told myself it would be romantic, the unannounced wife, the dress he loved, the look on his face when he walked through the hotel bar and found me already there waiting. I showered and put on the blue dress, the one he once held the hem of gently and said, "You look like someone worth being late for." And I went downstairs to the hotel bar and I ordered 1 drink and I put my phone face up on the counter and I waited. He did not come. 40 minutes passed. The bar was half full with the particular mix of business travelers and tired people that hotel bars collect in the early evening. A man sat 2 stools away from me. He said something about the television above the bar, something small and completely forgettable, a comment about whatever was playing. I responded, not because I was interested, not because I was looking for anything, but because I had not had a real conversation in 3 weeks. Not a real one, not the kind where someone actually looks at you while you are talking and responds to what you said rather than what they were already planning to say next. The conversation went longer than it should have. The evening went somewhere I never planned and cannot fully explain and will regret for every remaining year of my life. I was back in our hotel room before Paul returned from site, lying in the dark, still in that blue dress, already regretting what happened before it was even fully over, before the door had fully closed, before the room had gone quiet. The regret was already there, sitting on my chest, heavier than anything I had felt in 4 months of waiting. This was not a woman who had stopped loving her husband. This was a woman who had been empty for so long she reached for the wrong thing in the dark, and the moment she touched it, she understood exactly how wrong it was. Paul walked in 2 hours later smelling like construction dust and a long day. He kissed my forehead. He said he had missed me. He asked if I was hungry and I said no, and he showered and came to bed and lay beside me in the dark. And within 20 minutes, his breathing had slowed into sleep. I lay completely still next to him, staring at the ceiling of a Calabar hotel room with the weight of what I had done pressing down on me so heavily I could not tell where it ended and I began. And what I did not know, lying there in that dark next to my sleeping husband, was that while I had been sitting alone at that hotel bar counting minutes, Paul had not always been on site during those long Calabar evenings. Not always. I came home to Abuja on a Thursday evening and I did not sleep that night. Not because I was calculating the right words or rehearsing the right version of events that would hurt the least. I did not sleep because somewhere on that bus ride home, watching the darkness move past the window with the weight sitting in my chest, I made a decision. I was not going to carry this into my marriage like a hidden thing. I had watched what secrets did to people from the inside. I had watched them work slowly and invisibly, rotting the foundation while everything on the surface still looked fine. I was not willing to do that to us. So, on Friday morning, before the day could talk me out of it, I sat Paul down at our dining table. That table. The same one where we ate Sunday jollof and argued about whose was better. The same one where we spread the bills out on the last Saturday of every month. The same one where we sat together the morning after our first real argument, the difficult one, the one about his family, and drank tea in silence until the silence softened and we found our way back to each other. That table had held every important moment this marriage had built, and now I was about to place the worst one on it, without flinching. I told him everything. Not a softened version, not a version where I protected myself with careful language or edited the details to make my decision more understandable. Everything. The bus ticket, the blue dress, the hotel bar, the 40 minutes alone, the stranger, the dark room, every word of it, unedited, at a cost I am still paying. My voice shook through most of it, but I did not stop. I owed him the full truth and I gave it to him without removing a single word. Not because I was caught, not because someone threatened to tell him first, because I decided the only foundation worth rebuilding on was a real one. Paul listened without interrupting once. When I finished, the flat was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the faint sound of a neighbor's television through the wall. He sat across from me and looked at the table for a long time. I watched his jaw tighten. I watched him breathe carefully. I prepared myself for the chair scraping back, for the shouting, for him to stand up and walk out. I had already decided I would let him. I had already decided that whatever came, I had earned it and would not argue against it. And then he looked up at me and said, "I forgive you." Calm, complete. Like a man who had decided something private before the conversation even started. I exhaled for the first time since Calabar. Something unknotted in my chest so fast it almost hurt. I reached across the table and took his hand and he let me hold it. He did not squeeze back, but he let me hold it. And in that moment, I believed, truly believed with everything in me that we were going to survive this. That honesty had done what it was supposed to do. That the worst was behind us and the rest was just the slow, patient work of rebuilding. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea that the hand I was holding across that table, the hand of the man who had just given me forgiveness like a clean, quiet gift, was already holding a secret far heavier than the one I had just laid down. And that secret had a name. I need to stop here. Not for effect. Not because this is the part where I'm supposed to pause for dramatic reasons, but because this part of the memory sits in a completely different place in my chest, and I need a moment before I can carry it into words. If you are watching this right now, if you have stayed this far with me, I want to ask you something honestly. Have you ever apologized for something so many times that the apology stopped feeling like language and started feeling like a prison sentence? Like you were locked inside your own guilt and the person holding the key had simply decided they were not going to open it? That was me, for 2 years, on that floor. I need you to stay with me until the end, because what is coming will change everything I have just told you. Paul did not leave. That was the thing nobody warned me about, the thing I was least prepared for. He stayed. He ate the food I cooked every evening without complaint. He went to work every morning. He came home at reasonable hours. He slept on his side of the bed and woke up and did it all again the next day. From the outside, from any angle that did not involve actually living inside our Lugbe flat and feeling the specific temperature of the air between us,
We looked like couples moving carefully through a difficult season. We looked like people who were healing. We were not healing. Paul had gone somewhere inside himself and closed every door behind him so quietly I did not even hear them shut. He was not angry. I want you to understand that because it matters. I could have walked with anger. Anger has edges you can find and press against and argue with, and eventually, if you press long enough and hard enough, break through. What Paul gave me for 2 years was something far more difficult than anger. He gave me nothing. A sealed, temperature-controlled nothing that looked just enough like a present husband that I kept telling myself it was temporary. That he just needed more time. That one morning I would wake up and he would reach for me the way he used to, and everything would shift back into the shape I recognized. I tried everything a woman who has run out of options tries. I asked him to talk. He said nothing was wrong. I apologized again, the 15th time, the 30th. I eventually stopped counting because the counting was making it worse. I cooked his favorite meals and set the table properly and sat across from him making conversation about work, the neighbors, anything. And he responded in the minimum number of words required to make it technically qualify as a conversation. He never reached for me, not once. Not a hand on my shoulder passing through the kitchen, not a knee touching mine under the table, not even the unconscious, accidental closeness that happens between two people sharing one small flat. Nothing. It was like living beside someone who had decided my body no longer existed in the same space as his. One night, I cannot tell you which month because by then, the month had started bleeding into each other at the edges. I knelt on our bedroom floor. I am not proud of it and I am not ashamed of it. I was a woman who loved her husband and was losing him in a way she had no name for, and kneeling was the only language she had left. Tears on my face, hands open. I begged him to just look at me the way he used to, just once, just so I knew I was still someone he could see. He stood near the bedroom door with his phone in his hand, and he looked just past me, not at me, past me, like I was something he was patiently waiting to stop feeling. He did not shout. He said nothing cruel. He just stood there and waited for me to finish, and then he walked out, and I heard the television come on in the sitting room, and I stayed on that floor for a long time after he left. You cannot argue with a wall. You can only keep throwing yourself against it until there is nothing left of you to throw. By the end of the second year, I was so hollowed out by guilt and silence and the specific exhaustion of loving someone who had decided to be unreachable that I had almost completely stopped asking why. Almost, because somewhere underneath all of that exhaustion, underneath all those months of kneeling and apologizing and shrinking myself down to the size of my worst moment, something small and stubborn was forming a different question. Not when will he forgive me? Something harder, something that frightened me far more than the silence ever did. What is he not telling me? I was not looking for anything. I want to be clear about that because it matters more than it might seem. I was not going through his phone with intention. I was not the kind of wife who scrolled through messages looking for something to confirm a feeling she was already carrying. I had spent 2 years turning every hard thing inward, blaming myself, shrinking, kneeling on that floor. The last direction I was looking was outward. It was a Tuesday evening. Paul had left his phone on the dining table while he went to shower. A message came in and the screen lit up and I was close enough to see it without trying. The message was ordinary. The name above it was not Janet. Just a first name, saved as nothing else. I placed the phone face down before Paul came back into the room. I sat at that table and kept my face completely still because I did not yet know what I was holding, and I needed time before I reacted to something I did not fully understand. I did not confront him that night. I sat with it, and once I started sitting with it, things began surfacing that I had been too consumed by guilt to notice before.
the way his phone always dimmed or flipped face down when I walked into a room. I had told myself it was habit. The way certain conversations about Calabar ended 3 sentences sooner than they should have, like a man who had rehearsed the version of events he was willing to share and stopped at exactly that line every single time without going one word beyond it. I started doing the quiet arithmetic of a woman who has spent 2 years as the only accused person in her own marriage and is only now beginning to wonder if the courtroom was ever as simple as she had believed. Janet was not a name saved with a surname or a label or any context that would explain her presence in my husband's phone. She was saved the way you save someone you do not want to have to explain. I went back through my memory slowly. The Calabar trips that ran longer than the project timeline showed. The evenings his phone rang out when I called from that hotel bar. The way he had said, "I forgive you," at this same table so quickly and completely, like a man who needed that conversation finished before it could go anywhere deeper. And something shifted in my chest, cold and precise and absolute. What if his forgiveness had come so easily because he had something of his own that needed forgiving far more than mine did? I needed to know who Janet was. What I was not prepared for was what knowing would cost me.
He said it was a routine checkup. Those were the exact words he used when he left that morning. Routine checkup, I will be back before afternoon. I was in the kitchen when he said it. I nodded without turning around because by that point, Paul and I had perfected the specific choreography of 2 people living in the same space while occupying completely different worlds. He left. I finished my tea. I went about my morning carrying the weight of what I had been quietly piecing together about Janet for 2 weeks, turning it over and over like a stone I was not yet ready to throw. I told myself I would ask him this weekend. I told myself I was ready. I was not ready for what actually walked back through our door. He came back before afternoon. He walked through the door and something was different immediately. Not in anything he said, not in the way he greeted me, but in the way he moved. Slower, more deliberate, like a man carrying something physical that nobody else could see, but that was affecting every step he took. He put his keys on the counter without the small sound they usually made. He placed them quietly, deliberately, like a man who had decided that every movement from this point forward needed to be controlled. And then he walked to the dining table and he sat down. He did not turn on the television. He did not call my name. He did not do any of the small automatic things a person does when they come home. He just sat. I came to the doorway and looked at him, and I knew, the way you know things sometimes before you have any logical reason to know them, that whatever was about to happen at that table was going to be the most important conversation our marriage had ever held. More important than the confession, more important than the forgiveness, more important than anything that had happened in the 2 years of silence between those 2 moments. I sat down across from him. The same chairs, the same table, the same kitchen light on behind me. Everything exactly as it had always been, and nothing the same at all.
I noticed his hands first. They were flat on the table, both of them. Palms down, fingers slightly spread, completely still, like a man who had made a private decision that if he kept everything physical under absolute control, the words would come out in the correct order and not collapse before they reached me. His eyes were on the table, not on me. He was staring at the surface of that dining table the way you stare at something when you are not actually seeing it, when your eyes need somewhere to rest while your mind is doing something else entirely. His jaw was set, his shoulders were pulled slightly inward. He looked like a man who had been rehearsing something in a car park for 20 minutes and was now finally sitting down to deliver it. His voice, when he finally spoke, was so low, I had to lean forward slightly to catch it. He told me it was not a routine checkup. He told me the results had come back from tests he had taken 2 weeks earlier, tests he had not told me about, tests he had gone to alone, tests he had been sitting on the results of while I moved around our flat making tea and cooking food and quietly building a case about a woman named Janet. He told me the results were not what he had hoped. And then he told me, hands flat, eyes still on the table, voice barely holding its own shape, that he was HIV positive. The kitchen tap dripped once into the silence that followed. I remember that, the one drip. That same tap Paul had crouched under on 100 Saturday mornings with his tools and his laugh and his instruction for me to come fix it myself if I thought I knew better. That tap dripped once, and then the silence came back and sat between us at that table, and I did not speak, I did not cry, I did not move, I just sat completely still while the last 2 years rearranged themselves in front of me into a shape I had never seen before, but somehow, sitting there, already recognized.
The cold bed, the sealed distance, the 2 years of me on that bedroom floor with my hands open and my voice breaking while he stood near the door and looked just past me. I had told myself it was punishment. I had worn that punishment like it had been sewn into my skin. I had apologized every day for 2 years for one honest mistake I confessed at this same table before anyone else could find it. And now, sitting here, I understood that it was never punishment. It was fear. He had known or suspected or feared what he might be carrying inside his own body, and he had chosen silence. He had chosen to say nothing while I chose confession. He had chosen to protect himself while I chose honesty. He had let me kneel on that floor for 2 years while he stood above me holding the real reason in his chest and said nothing. I looked at his hands, still flat, still pressed against the table like a man holding himself together from the outside because the inside had already come apart. And I noticed, for the first time in 2 years, that his eyes were wet. Not crying, wet. The specific wetness of a man who has been holding something back for so long that his body has started doing what his mouth refused to do. His chin was not steady. His shoulders had dropped from their controlled position into something smaller and more honest. And I thought, sitting there, looking at this man I had built a life with in a small flat in Lupe, that is the first honest thing your body has shown me in 2 years. Not words, not explanation, just a man finally sitting in the full weight of what he carried and what it cost both of us. I stood up. I did not shout. I did not throw anything. I did not say the 100 things that were pressing against the inside of my chest looking for a way out. I picked up my bag from the back of the chair slowly, and I held it against me, and Paul looked up at me for the first time since he had sat down. His mouth opened. I think he was going to say something. Maybe sorry, maybe please, maybe just my name, the way people say your name when they have run out of every other word. But I was already walking toward the door. I heard the chair move slightly behind me as he shifted. I did not turn around. I drove to the clinic alone. No Paul sitting in the passenger seat. No phone call to a friend to explain what I was going to. Just me and the Abuja afternoon. And a question sitting in my chest so large, I had to breathe around it carefully. The way you breathe around a bruised rib. Shallow, measured, aware of exactly where the pain lives. The roads were busy. I sat in traffic on the way and watched people going about ordinary afternoon business outside my window, and I thought about how strange it was that the world could look exactly the same as it always did on a day when everything inside your own life was rearranging itself beyond recognition. The clinic waiting room had a television mounted in the corner playing on mute, a news program, politicians moving their mouths at each other about something that had nothing to do with anything happening inside that room. I watched it without seeing it, because watching it gave my eyes somewhere to go that was not the faces of the other people sitting in those plastic chairs around me. We did not look at each other. That is the unspoken agreement that exists in a room like that. Everyone is carrying something private, and the kindest thing strangers can do for each other is to pretend they cannot see the weight. So we all looked at the muted television and waited. I sat with my bag on my lap and my hands folded on top of it, and I thought about the dining table. I thought about the blue dress in that Calabar hotel room. I thought about a bedroom floor in Lugbe and 2 years of apologies that never once landed the way I needed them to. I thought about a name saved as only a first name in a phone left on a table. I thought about a man with flat hands and wet eyes who could not look at me when he finally, after everything, told the truth. I thought about all the mornings I had ironed his shirt when I was tired, all the Sunday jollof, all the argument about that couch, all of it sitting in that waiting room with me, taking up every seat. A nurse called my name. I stood up. I walked into a small room with a desk and 2 chairs, and a window with the blinds half open, letting in the late afternoon light.
A doctor I had never met before told me my result in a voice that was professionally gentle, in the specific way that exists in rooms where people receive news that will reorganize their lives. He slid a paper across the desk toward me. I looked at it. One word carried all the weight in that moment: negative. I looked at that word for a long time, long enough that the doctor said my name gently to check that I was still present. And then I want to tell you something honest about that word, negative. It did not feel the way I had imagined it would during the drive over. I had imagined relief arriving like something physical, like a wave, like air rushing back into a room that had been sealed shut. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a road and realizing the car that just passed you had missed you by less than you will ever be able to accurately measure. Not safety, not rescue, not the clean exhale I had been holding my entire body in preparation for. Just the cold, specific understanding that luck had shown up this time, without being earned, and without making any promises about whether it would show up again. I walked out of that clinic into the Abuja afternoon heat, and I sat in my car and I did not move for a long time. The engine was off, the windows were up. I just sat in the still, warm air of that car, and I let everything that had happened in the last several hours, the flat hands, the wet eyes, the dripping tap, the single word on that paper, settle into their permanent places inside me. Because I understood, sitting in that car, that a negative result did not resolve anything. It did not answer the question. It only changed the weight of it. I thought about Paul at that table. I thought about how I had sat across from him 2 years ago and given him every word of the truth, unedited, unprotected, at a cost I am still paying. And how he had looked at me and said, "I forgive you," while already knowing what he might be carrying, while Janet already existed, while the secret that would take 2 more years and a doctor's result to surface was already sitting in his chest, getting heavier every single day. I thought about all the times he watched me kneel on that floor, all the times he stood above me and waited for me to finish and said nothing. And I understood something I had not fully understood before, that his silence was not grief. It was not even punishment. It was a man protecting himself while his wife destroyed herself, apologizing for less. We were both guilty. I have never pretended otherwise, and I am not starting now. I made a mistake in a Calabar hotel bar on a lonely night when I had been empty for too long, and I walked home and I put it on that dining table before anyone else could find it. I own every gram of that. I have owned it every single day since it happened. But Paul made his mistake across months, repeatedly, deliberately, with a woman whose name he saved as only a first name so it would be easier to deny, without protection, without caution. And then he came home to Abuja and accepted my confession and performed forgiveness and stood above me on that bedroom floor for 2 years while his own secret grew heavier and more dangerous with every single day he chose to say nothing. My mistake could have broken us. His mistake could have killed me. I need you to sit with the distance between those 2 sentences. Not skim over it, sit inside it. Because that distance is where I have been living every single day since I walked out of that clinic and got into my car and sat in the Abuja heat with a negative result and a question I still cannot answer alone. That distance is not small. That distance is not something that love automatically closes or that guilt automatically bridges. That distance is the entire question. I have been on that floor. I have done the kneeling. I have apologized until the word lost all meaning inside my own mouth. I paid every day in full for what I did. And I am still standing here, still at that table, still holding this, asking what a woman who was not innocent owes a man who was far less innocent than he ever allowed her to believe. Does guilt cancel out guilt when one of them comes home in your blood? Do 2 wrongs weigh the same when one of them could have ended my life while I was busy apologizing for the other?
What does staying mean when living feels like survival and living feels like abandonment at exactly the same time? I am still deciding. I want you to know that this is not a story I am telling from the other side of a clean resolution. I am telling it from the middle of the hardest decision of my life, with no map and no guarantee and no version of the answer that does not cost something I am not sure I can afford to lose. So I am asking you, not for performance, not for the comments, but because I genuinely need more perspectives than my own right now. Tell me what you would do. Tell me what you think a woman who confessed immediately owes a man who stayed silent for 2 years. Tell me where guilty ends and survival begins. Because I am still at that table, and I am still deciding. But I am no longer on that floor. I am standing. That is where this story ends. Not with a resolution, not with a decision announced, not with a clean answer that wraps everything that happened in our small Lugbe flat into something easier to carry. It ends with a woman standing. The same woman who spent 2 years kneeling. The same woman who ironed shirts when she was tired and cooked jollof every Sunday and held a hand across a table and believed that honesty was always worth its cost. She is still here, still standing, still deciding. And if you have stayed with me through every part of this story, through Lugbe and Calabar and that dining table and that bedroom floor and that clinic waiting room, then you already know that standing after everything is not nothing. Standing after everything is everything.